هالند کشوری از کوچک با 16.5 میلیون جمعیت. پایتخت هالند شهر آمستردام است. هالند از شرق با آلمان، از جنوب با بلژیک و از غرب نیز از طریق دریا با بریتانیا همسایه است. بندر روتردام دومین شهر بزرگ هالند به شمار می رود. 25% از زمین‌های کشور هالند پایین‌تر از سطح دریای آزاد قرار دارد و 21% از جمعیت آن در این مناطق زندگی می‌کنند. هالند را به خاطر داشتن مزارع گل‌های زیاد به نام سرزمین گل‌ها نیز یاد می‌کنند. هالند در واقع یک دلتای سرسبز است که رودخانه‌های چون راین از میان آن می‌گذرد. از این رو هالند کوه ندارد و ارتفاع بلندترین تپه در جنوب این کشور 322 متر بیشتر نیست. خاک هالند بیشتر ریگی بوده و بخش وسیعی از این کشور را کشتزارها و چراگاه‌های سرسبز تشکیل می‌دهد. جنگل‌های طبیعی و مصنوعی، نهرها و دریاچه‌ها در آن به وفور یافت می‌شود. هالند سرزمینی بارانی با زمستان‌های طولانی و تابستان‌های کوتاه و ملایم است. هالند از لحاظ فرهنگی کشوری پربار بوده، بنابراین نقاش‌های شناخته شده ای را در خود پرورانیده است. در سده 17 میلادی، زمانی هالند در اوج خود بود، استادان بزرگی چون رامبراند، یوهانس ورمر، جان استین، جیکوب ایساکزون و بسیار دیگر فعالیت می‌کردند. از نقاش‌های مشهور سده 19 و 20 هالند وان گوگ و پت مپندریان بودند. موریس اشر هنرمند گرافیست این دوران بود. هالند خانه فیلسوف‌های بزرگی چون اسپینوزا و اراسموس بوده است. تمام کارهای اصلی دکارت در هالند انجام شده است. پس از سال 2001 هنگامی که افغانستان فصل جدیدی از رابطه و همکاری دوجانبه و چندجانبه‌اش را با دنیا آغاز کرد، کشور شاهی هالند از جمله اولین کشورهایی بود که در کنار مردم و دولت افغانستان ایستاد. جامعه جهانی نیز در کنفرانس‌های شیکاگو و بروکسل، توکیو و کنفرانس لندن تعهد کردند که در دهه تحول در کنار مردم افغانستان باقی خواهند ماند. افغانستان امروزی برای کشورهای مختلف دنیا یک متحد استراتژیک است. باشندگان افغانستان آرمان داشتن یک جهان صلح آمیز و دور از تنش را همیشه با خود داشته‌اند. بدین ترتیب همه دوستان بین المللی افغانستان می‌دانند بودن در کنار دولت و مردم افغانستان برای امنیت ملی کشور ما از اهمیت بالای برخوردار است. کشور شاهی هالند نیز با درک این مورد در 14 سال اخیر یکی از متحدان و کمک کننده های مهم دولت و مردم افغانستان بوده و در جهت تأمین امنیت، ثبات و توسعه افغانستان همکاری های مؤثری داشته است. رابطه و همکاری نزدیک و دوستانه کشور شاهی هالند و افغانستان به این 14 سال اخیر خلاصه نمی شود، بلکه سابقه طولانی دارد. کمک های کشور شاهی هالند و بخش امنیتی خلاصه نمی شود، بلکه این کشور در بخش های مختلف با دولت و مردم افغانستان همکاری داشته است. به این گونه افغانستان اهمیت ویژه‌ای به رابطه‌اش با کشور شاهی هالند قائل است و دولت مداران افغانستان در راستای تقویت روابط دوجانبه با این کشور وعده تلاش بیشتر از پیش را داده اند. نیروهای نظامی کشور شاهی هالند در ولایت‌های ارزگان، کندهار و بغلان در سالهای گذشته وظیفه انجام دادند و شماری از این نیروها در افغانستان برای تأمین امنیت و ثبات کشور ما جان داده اند که این قربانی ها را هرگز مردم افغانستان فراموش نخواهند کرد. همین اکنون حدود 100 آموزگار این کشور در چارچوب مأموریت پلیس اتحادیه اروپا در افغانستان مشغول آموزش نیروهای امنیتی افغانستان می باشند. کشور شاهی هالند در 14 سال اخیر بیش از 1.5 میلیارد دلار آمریکایی در بخش‌های مختلف با دولت افغانستان کمک کرده و همچنان تا سال 2017 میلادی این کشور تعهد کرده است که سالانه 60 میلیون یورو به افغانستان کمک نماید.
رب اشرح لی صدری و یسر لی امری واحلل عقدة من لسانی یفقهوا قولی یا کریم. عرض سلام و خوش آمد دارم خدمت تمام مدعوین محترم، سروران نهایت عزیز و برجاوند، شخصیت‌های علمی، فرهنگی و سیاسی و شما جوانان و آینده سازان این سرزمین که در این جمع حضور دارید. جمعی که امروز گرد هم آمدند قرار است که با هماندیشی و تفاهم و همنظری و سوالاتی که انشاءالله در خلال برنامه مطرح خواهند کرد دوستان ما، قرار است به یک گفتمان بسیار خوب در رابطه با یک دهه که قرار است تحولی هم در او رونما شود سخن به میان بیاید. از پایان سال 2014 و آغاز سال 2015 تا پایان سال 2024 دهه تحول نام گرفته و این دهه تحول زیربنای تمام حرکت‌های دیگر در رابطه با رسیدن به سرمنزل مقصود و آینده روشن قرار است که شکل بگیره از این تحول. اما ای که تا حال این تحولات چقدر موفقیت به همراه داشته و چقدر خوبی‌ها و بدیهای احیانا اگر به همراه داشته قرار است که در این جلسه با هم و بحث و تبادل نظر بگیریم. اما در این لحظه از همکاران بسیار دوست داشتنی و همکاران بسیار خوبم خواهش میکنم که سرود مقدس جمهوری اسلامی افغانستان و همچنین متعاقب از او سرود کشور شاهی هلند را به صدا در بیارند و همه ما و شما به احترام این دو سرود به پا خواهیم ایستاد و آرزوی پیوندهای دیرینه و دوستی‌های مستدام را با هم خواهیم داشت. خیلی سپاسگزار هستم از حضور تمام شما مهمانان عزیز و در آغاز باز هم قرار است که یک پیوند، یک نگاه مثبت به آینده داشته باشیم. به همین خاطر پس از خدا می‌خواهیم که در آغاز این محفل صلح و دوستی و برادری را برای همه ما و شما انشاءالله ارزانی بکنه. خب من نمیخوایم زیاد وقت دوستا و بزرگوارا را بگیرم، به همین خاطر با کمال احترام دعوت میکنم از بزرگانی که انشاءالله در کنار ما در قسمتی که برایشان تهیه شده دعوتشان میکنم به جایگاه تشریف بیارن و بعد از او به صحبت‌ها و سخنرانی‌هایی که آماده شده خواهیم پرداخت. از جناب محترم هنک یان بکر سفیر کشور شاهی هلند من خواهش میکنم که به جایگاه تشریف بیارن. مستر بکر، با افتخارشان خواهش میکنم. دعوت میکنم با کمال افتخار از جناب دکتر سید مخدوم رهین، رئیس پوهنتون یومف سوئیس در افغانستان، با افتخارشان. با کمال احترام دعوت میکنم از جناب پوهنیار احمدشاه سنگدل، رئیس پوهنتون دنیا، با افتخارشان خواهش میکنم.
Universiteit DUNYA is in 2008 opgericht en heeft zich in de afgelopen 7 jaar in Zwitserland, Senegal en Afghanistan kunnen vestigen, die in Nederland opgedaan. Kennis en ervaring heb ik in Afghanistan gebruikt om de eerste universiteit te kunnen oprichten. Namens Nederland bied ik deze studenten een toekomst aan. In de afgelopen 14 jaar is Nederland een van de belangrijkste ondersteuner geweest bij zaken als gezondheidszorg, veiligheid, onderwijs, bestuur. En opbouwen op dat moment zijn er is 100 Nederlandse docenten die aan Afghanistan politie, agenten, onderwijzer verzorgen. Om deze agenten zo op te leiden, zodat zij die verder kunnen bewerken en corruptie kunnen tegengaan. Ik bedank Nederland voor zijn help aan het Afghanistan volk op het vlak van onderwijzen zal ik mijn medewerker verlenen. Dank u wel. دوستای عزیز، جایگاه کشور شاهی هلند در دهه تحول. جناب هنک یان بکر، سفیر کشور شاهی هلند در افغانستان. آقایان و خانم‌های نهایت مسرورم که افتخار حضور در جمع شما فریختگان دارم. امروز مجمع علمی دنیا افتخار برگزاری برنامه را دارد که جایگاه کشور شاهی هلند در آن نهایت پررنگ است. دهه تحول نه تنها یک فرصت است، بل مسئولیت سنگین نیز برای افغانستان و شرکای بین المللیش می باشد. من به افغانستان و شرکای بین المللیش و ویژه کشور شاهی هلند کاملا باور دارم که تعهداتشان را در چارچوب دهه تحول مسئولانه انجام می دهند و دهه تحول بدون تردید بسترهای لازم را برای تداوم و تحولات مثبت در افغانستان فراهم خواهند ساخت. مسئولین عزیز، اجازه بفرمایید اشاره مختصری به مختصیات مجموعه علمی دنیا به مثابه یک قانون ارزشگر و روشنگر داشته باشم. یکی از ویژگی‌هایی که این قانون علمی تحصیلی را نسبت به سایر مراکز تحصیلی متمایز می‌سازد، سیستم ECTS یا سیستم کردیت اروپا است. مجموعه علمی دنیا با تعامل این سیستم توانسته است جایگاه تعیین کننده ای را در میان پنهان‌های خصوصی افغانستان از آن خود نماید. نکته دیگری که میخواهم بدان بپردازم، مجموعه علمی دنیا تفاهمی که با شمار اساتید 3 قاره جهان دارد، از 24 کشور به ویژه کشورهای اروپایی پروفسوران ارشد و با تجربه را دعوت می نماید. دستاوردهای مجموعه علمی دنیا در ابعاد مختلف قابل تذکر است، اما چون محور این نشست را دهه تحول شکل می‌دهد نمی‌خواهم بیشتر از این اشارات داشته باشم. در پایان ضمن تشکری از تشریف آوری شما و مجموعه علمی دنیا جا دارد از الطاف و چگونگی برخوردتان با افغان‌های مقیم هالند نیز سپاسگزاری نمایم. من با فرزندانم از سالها بدین سو در کشور شاهی هالند زندگی می‌نمایند. زندگی در هالند و در کنار هالندیان برای افغان‌هایی که در اونجا کمک صورت گرفته است بسیار خیلی زیبا میباشد. مردم نجیب هالند نهایت مهربان، مهمان دوست هستند. بنابراین میزبانی از شما برای ما افتخار است. تشکر.
و حالا از جناب عبدالصبوح فیضی مشاور سیاسی سفارت کشور شاهی هالند تقاضا میکنم که صحبت‌هایی را با شما شریک بسازند و ای که در 12 سال اخیر چه فعل و انفعالات اقتصادی و سیاسی در این کشور و 2 کشور با توجه به دهه تحول و نقش و جایگاه کشور شاهی هالند در دهه تحول قرار است با ما سخن بزنند. شما بهتر می‌دانید که در طول 1 دهه اخیر 1.5 میلیارد دلار کشور شاهی هالند به افغانستان کمک‌های گوناگونی را انجام داده. من نمیخوایم بگم که این 1.5 میلیارد دلار چگونه مصرف شده و چه جایگاهی را به خود اختصاص داده و امروز آیا ما میتونیم بگوییم که متحول شدیم یا نه. من نمیخوایم سخن بزنم. با افتخار جناب فیضی خواهش میکنم.
Ambassador Dr. Rahim, General, Members of Parliament, very distinguished, talented students of UMF and DUNYA University, ladies and gentlemen. The Netherlands in Afghanistan won some highlights. The Kingdom of Netherlands supports Afghanistan for the last 14 years to ensure peace and stability by contributing to ISAF followed by RSM mission with significant amount of development cooperation. The Dutch armed forces took part in different missions in Afghanistan, such as Baghlan province, Kandahar province, Uruzgan province, as well as Kunduz. In 2007, for instance, almost 2,000 military service women and men were actively present in uniform in Afghanistan to help the Afghan National Security Forces as well as the Afghan government for good governance, security and stability. Since January 2015, Netherlands contributes to NATO's new mission, so-called Resolute Support, with the participation of 100 military trainers and advisors for Kabul and TAC North Mazar-e-Sharif. Subsequently, from 2002, Afghanistan has been one of Netherlands' most significant partners in development cooperation. Netherlands has been active in sectors like education, health, food security, agriculture, and as well as rule of law. From 2006 until 2010, strong focus remained on Uruzgan province, where Netherlands was PRT-led nation, implementing the so-called 3D approach, development, defense, as well as diplomacy. Areas such as infrastructure, health, education, capacity building, security remain main area of focus. The focus in Kunduz province from 2010 until 2013 was police training missions and chain of development within the judiciary sector, empowering police, judges, prosecutors, lawyers, increasing access to justice for women and men. Activities in Kunduz, northern parts of Afghanistan, are to be continued until end of 2017. With the focus on access to justice, capacity building, for both formal and informal justice sector. A great example of our achievement and as well as engagement in education sector is the National Agriculture Education Center, where we support training programs for teachers to enable them to support agriculture areas related at the provincial level. The total budget for Afghanistan is currently plus 60 million euros per year until end of 2017. This amount was about 100 million euros per year in the past years. Since 2005, Afghanistan has received in total more than 1 billion euros, which equals to $1.5 billion in terms of development cooperation when it comes to Netherlands development cooperation and support to Afghanistan. Worth mentioning, Afghanistan is still the largest recipient of Dutch development cooperation so far. With this note, I'll rather end this, what we have achieved during the last 13 years. Let me briefly touch upon the short biography of His Excellency Ambassador Bakker. Ambassador Henk Bakker was born on 6 December 1964 in Netherlands. He studied political science, international relations at Leiden University, where he graduated in 1991. In 1992, he joined the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Kingdom of Netherlands. After a 3-year period in United Nations Department of the Ministry, he was posted to Netherlands Embassy in South Africa in 1995. In 1998, he returned to the Netherlands to be seconded to the Ministry of Economic Affairs, where he became responsible for Dutch bilateral economic relations with China. In 2001, he returned to Ministry of Foreign Affairs for 1-year posting at the Human Rights Department. He subsequently posted as economic consular in charge at Netherlands permanent representative to OECD in Paris, where in 2004 he was elected chairman of Working Party of the Trade Committee. In 2006, he was appointed at the Netherlands Embassy in London. In 2010, he returned to Netherlands to become head of business environment in the Department of Sustainable Economic Department at Ministry of Foreign Affairs. In 2011, he became deputy director for human resources at MFA, and last but not the least, since August 2014, he was appointed as the ambassador of the Kingdom of Netherlands to the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan. Thank you.
تا روی دلت سوی خرابات نباشد، آگاهیت از سر مناجات نباشد. ای زاهد خودبین، به خدا راه نیابی تا آگاهیت از سر مناجات نباشد. جز یار نبینی اگر دیده شود باز، رو دیده بجو حاجت اثبات نباشد. عکس رخ جانان نپذیرد دل تنگت، گر سینه تو پاک چو مرآت نباشد. رو صیقل اخلاص بزن لوح درون را، کین کار به تزویر و به طامات نباشد. جز نامه انسان که ز عشقش شده نامی، کس در خور این فخر و مباهات نباشد. خیلی سپاسگزار هستیم از جناب فیضی که در رابطه با یک دهه گذشته با شما سخن زدند و همینطور که در بین صحبت‌هایشان بود از کمک‌هایی که شد، از فرصت‌ها و چالش‌هایی که وجود داشت با شما با اختصار اما کامل سخن زدند. And now I would like to ask His Excellency Mr. Henk Bakker, the Ambassador of Netherlands Royal Country in Kabul, to kindly come on stage and give his speech. Your Excellency, Mr. Bakker.
There are many, well, I can think of many reasons to be not so optimistic about Afghanistan, and you know them all. There's a security situation, not just as a result of the insurgency and the Taliban, but also other militant groups, the emergence of Daesh, former warlords, crime. That is obviously a huge problem. Then the economy doesn't grow at the moment. There is a big fiscal gap. Jobs are not created. There is high unemployment. We have a national unity government that doesn't function in unity very much. They seem to have an approach of a zero-sum game rather than trying to find win-win situations. We see every day in Kabul air pollution, environmental degradation, water. I could go on, but I will not depress you. The president sometimes says to us ambassadors that he probably has the most difficult job in the world, and I tend to agree. But let's take a step back and look at it from the other direction. There are also reasons to be optimistic and to be positive about what is going on. If you look at the economy, in spite of the low growth, inflation is relatively low and stable. The currency is stable. Even though we don't have growth today, there was growth in the last decade, and average incomes have risen considerably in Afghanistan over the last 12, 13, 14 years. Millions of children go to school and to university these days. 14 years ago, you all know it, there were basically 0 girls going to school. Today, somewhere between 3 and 4 million, and the numbers are rising. I see lots of female students in this hall today, which is encouraging. Healthcare is improved. The justice system has improved. And in spite of the difficult security situation we are in right now, some people predicted a collapse of the state and of the government and of the security situation in Afghanistan, and it hasn't happened. The national unity government is fighting corruption through the procurement system. It's cleaned up some banks. So there are reasons to be optimistic as well. It is not all as bleak as we think it is. So, is there a half full or a half empty glass? What are we looking at? Well, sometimes I have good days and I think the glass is half full, and sometimes I have not so good days. I watched Mr. Nuristani make a statement on television yesterday, and that was a bad day. But I'm an optimist by nature, and I think there are reasons to be optimistic. I'd like to take you back to take another step back, if you will. When I started my career in the early 1990s, in my first job, I dealt with the humanitarian situation in the former Yugoslavia. Quite frankly, it was a completely hopeless situation at that time. There was a civil war going on, an incredibly complex conflict based on centuries of tension between different ethnic and national groups, Serbs, Croats, Bosnians. There were 3 sides. There was a confused and divided international community, and we all thought it would never come right. I have seen reports at that time. I was a young diplomat of the most atrocious human rights violations. In short, that didn't look good at all, and we all thought this was going to last for decades. Today, there is peace and stability in the former Yugoslavia. Slovenia and Croatia are members of the European Union. And you don't just become member of the European Union, you have to go through a long process of accession to get there. There is still tension in the region, but it is contained, and I think we all agree that it is stable enough. So while the situation today may look bleak sometimes, things change in different parts of the world as well, and let's hope in Afghanistan too. So back to the decade of transition, which ends in 2024. What do we want in 2024? What do you want in 2024? 10 years from now, what do you want your country to look like? If you ask that question and you ask the right questions, people all over the world will come up with the same 3 answers. They want peace and stability. They want some form of economic development so that they can improve their own lives, but more importantly, improve the lives of their children, so that they will have better chances and better lives. And they want some form of justice and respect for human rights. And you will get these answers in different formulations, but those are the 3 issues that people always want, and that I think are central to the future of Afghanistan as well, and which we are working so hard to try to achieve. So let's look at those three for a moment. First, peace and stability. In the early 1990s, I think the international community made a big mistake by thinking that after the withdrawal of the Soviet troops, the problem was solved. It wasn't, of course, and you all know very well. We all paid a very high price. Afghanistan in the first place, obviously, but the international community in the end as well. Afghanistan became a platform for international terrorism, and then 9/11 happened. So we will not make that same mistake again. We will not walk away again. When I try to explain to people in the Netherlands, I do these speeches in the Netherlands as well, and when I try to explain to people why are we there, why should we even bother, Netherlands, far, far away, why should we bother with a country like Afghanistan? And I always say, because it is in our interest, it is in our own interest to be here. The Netherlands is a small, open economy. We are traders. Instability, wherever it is in the world, is bad for us. For our own security, you have maybe noticed the attack recently, which failed on a train from Amsterdam to Paris, where somebody with a Kalashnikov wanted to shoot people on that train, and some very brave American and French people prevented him from doing that. That is not a Dutch or a Belgian or a French problem. It is an international problem. This man had probably been in Syria and came back with the wrong ideas. So that really touches on the security of a country like the Netherlands. Or to give you another example, the Malaysia Airlines flight, which was shot down over Ukraine a year ago, is also had to do with a conflict that isn't ours, that is far away, but has impact on the Netherlands. And to give you an idea, 200 Dutch people died in that crash. As a proportion of the population, that has a bigger impact than 9/11 had in the United States. And almost everybody in the Netherlands knows at least somebody who knew somebody on that plane. I personally knew 2 people on that plane. Not very well, but I knew them and I had met them and talked to them. So what we tend to say in the Netherlands, far away Istan, far away conflicts, they don't exist anymore. And apart from our security, it also has to do with our economic, the Dutch economy. As I said, we are an open economy, a nation of traders. Instability in Afghanistan has an impact on instability in Pakistan and other countries, and a little further away, for instance, in India. Our economic interests in Afghanistan are not very big. Our economic interests in Pakistan are slightly bigger. Our economic interests in India are huge. If this region becomes even more a hotbed of instability than it is now, that has an impact on the Dutch economy, not only directly in terms of trade and investment, but also through oil prices, through stock markets, you name it. So, self-interest. And self-interest, in my view, is usually the best interest. If you do it for yourself, you have a real incentive to do something. We are convinced that we must find a way to bring peace to Afghanistan and to this region. It is as complicated, perhaps even more, than the conflict in the former Yugoslavia 20 years ago. There are many players, not only the Taliban, Haqqani, Al-Qaeda, Daesh, IMU, there are many groups. Every week you open a newspaper, another group has emerged. Internationally, of course, Pakistan, Iran, India, Saudi Arabia all have an interest in this very complicated region. And of course the US, China, and ourselves, the European countries as well. The President has approached the conflict in the last 10, 11 months by arguing that to bring peace with the Taliban, he would first have to have peace with Pakistan. I think he is at the moment rethinking that strategy. The speech he made 2 weeks ago was a clear indication of that. happy to talk about this further in the Q&A session, but certainly the question is, will you bring peace with the Taliban through Pakistan, or will you bring peace with Pakistan through the Taliban? Where do you start? Who do you engage in these negotiations? It's very complicated. I don't have answers, but we do have some ideas about how that may happen. And of course, especially for young people like yourselves, if and when we do start to negotiate with the Taliban about a peace deal, what price are we prepared to pay? What price are you prepared to pay to have peace in this country? Because they obviously have their demands in those peace negotiations, if and when they happen. The area is economic development. I was in the Panjshir a week ago. Beautiful trip through the Panjshir, and what occurred to me almost immediately is, what if indeed peace broke out in this country, and what if you could economically develop the Panjshir Valley into a touristic area? The possibilities are endless. We visited some sites that are, in my view, as close to paradise as any place that I've ever been, and I've traveled to quite a few countries. It is actually stunningly beautiful. So economic development to a large degree depends on this peace and stability. And the peace dividend I think can be very high once that happens. But even today, while we are still in the situation we are in, there are many ways to improve the Afghan economy. To give you a few examples, Afghanistan is possibly the most bureaucratic country I've ever been to. For me to speak here today, we had to seek official permission from the Ministry of Higher Education. And my question to my political advisor was, why? Why does the Ministry of Higher Education have to give permission for somebody to speak at a university? It's okay to inform them, but permission? And we had to go to I think the Deputy Minister to get that permission. Would they say no if we asked them? I don't think so. So this is one very small example of a form of bureaucracy that is completely unnecessary, that you can do away with. I understand that in high schools and also primary schools, if you want to appoint a teacher, the appointment has to be made in Kabul. That's ridiculous. A teacher in Kandahar should be appointed by the head of his school or her school, or perhaps by a local or a provincial authority. But why does somebody in a ministry in Kabul have to decide whether somebody can be a teacher in a school in Kandahar or in Kunduz or somewhere else? I understand, I'll give you another small example, that any government official that goes on holiday from a certain level, goes on holiday or on official travel, needs a signature from the president. A poor man, how many signatures does he have to put every day? That's apart from all, I think his leg is hurting at the moment, but his arm must be hurting as well. There are many examples. If you want to sell a house in Kabul, I think you need about 120 signatures. That can be reduced considerably. The previous examples are not so serious, but 120 signatures to sell a house in Kabul are 120 opportunities for somebody to take a bribe. So if you want to fight corruption, fight bureaucracy, get rid of all the unnecessary decisions that have to be taken by some bureaucrat, and you will reduce corruption as well. Reduce the administrative burden for business, who have to seek permission for almost every step along the way as well. Try to do that. That is not rocket science. It is not very difficult. It doesn't depend on the security situation. These are things that can be done today. And another way to improve the economic situation, if you will, is there are many ways to create jobs. And I understand from colleagues within the different ministries that in the senior officials meeting, which is a meeting between the Afghan government and the international community, which takes place a week from now, there will be proposals from the Afghan government to try to create jobs from the government side. So far about the economy. Third point, justice. A justice system needs to be fair and it needs to be free of corruption again. People must have trust in the fairness, in the effectiveness and in the speed of the justice system. We, my colleague Subofaisi mentioned it already, in our current program focus completely on rule of law, and we try to improve the justice system in Afghanistan. Because if you don't have a fair, effective and speedy justice system, people will seek justice elsewhere. And they might seek justice with the Taliban, for instance, who are, I don't know how free and fair they are, but they are speedy. So the whole system, the police, the formal justice, the informal justice system is all very important in trying to improve the feeling of justice of the population, because that is maybe the most important part. These are processes that don't take years, they take decades. It takes very long to build up systems like that that are ingrained, that are free of corruption, that are free of, that are the way they should work. Okay, these three things. What do we need to get that? What do we need to make that happen? I could list 100 things, but perhaps the most important thing we need, quite frankly, is you. You, young, educated Afghans, are needed to improve your country. So perhaps my most important message today is, don't go away, stay in your country. You can go abroad and study, but if you do, come back. Afghanistan needs you. A long time ago, President Kennedy, when he did his inauguration speech in the year, was it the year I was born? Sort of. 50 years ago, or maybe even longer ago, he said, don't ask what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. And I would make the same plea to all of you today as well. Ask what you can do for your country, and you are all so talented and so well educated that I think you have a lot to offer to your country. Many people are leaving. I hear that every day. I always try to say, well, life as a refugee in Europe or on your way to Europe isn't much better, probably worse than life today here in Kabul. Another thing, and I'm very happy to see a lot of women in this room, is the role of women. We had an event at the embassy the other day about the empowerment of women in Afghanistan. And it is very, very important that women take up their role as equals. Another American politician, John Kerry, once said that you cannot develop a country if you leave half the population behind. Women have their role to play in the economy, in government, as equals. And it is important, I think, that youth speak in one voice. Make yourself heard. Don't let any ethnic or language differences get in your way. It is very easy to find differences between each other. It is more difficult to find what you have in common, but look for it. You have lots and lots in common. So, to finish, peace, economic growth and justice. So those are the three main items, main themes that we see as an embassy and as a government of the Netherlands for the decade of transition. A few closing remarks. First of all, will a decade be enough? No, I don't think so. If you look at other examples, countries, for instance like Mozambique, that came out of a conflict in the early 90s, it takes many decades. Even South Africa, where I was posted, which is a more developed country than many African countries and more than Afghanistan, still needs forms of support to grow and to stay stable. So it will be a long process. Even if we start today, even if peace broke out today, it will be a long process. And finally, the view of the Netherlands, or the role or the place of the Netherlands in all this. Will we be there in 10 years? I cannot say for 100% because I'm not a politician. My political masters will take those decisions. It is not me. I can only advise them. My advice will be to do so, to stay. As I said right at the beginning, we cannot afford the mistake that we made in the early 1990s. And my expectation is that they will follow my advice. It would be a bit of a pity if they didn't. I would have done my job wrong. Afghanistan needs it. Afghanistan deserves it. But perhaps, and that is my argument always to my political masters as well, we need it, and it is in our interest as well. So in light of our own self-interest, I think we will be here during the decade of transformation, and very likely also after the decade of transformation. In what form or shape, I don't know yet. But my expectation is that we will have a long, long future ahead of us of cooperation between Afghanistan and the Netherlands. Thank you very much.
Gratitude to His Excellency Mr. Henk Bakker for sharing his speech with us. Thank you very much. حالا من خواهش میخوایم بکنم از دوستا، کسایی که احیانا سوالاتی را در ذهن خودشان پرورش دادن و قرار است که سوالات مطرح شود، به خاطر که این افهام و تفهیم راحت‌تر صورت بگیره و پل میانی هم دیگه وجود نداشته باشه، من از دوستانی که غالبا میدانم زبان انگلیسی را کامل میدانن، سوالاتشان را با زبان انگلیسی مطرح بکنن و انشالله جناب سفیر صاحب هم پاسخ خواهند گفت.
The first question is, as we all know, the years between 2014 and 2024 have been called as the decade of transformation. My question is, what is the role of the Kingdom of Netherlands in this transformation decade? And the second question is, 1 billion euro, obviously that's a lot of money. And as we know, it has been the donations so far to the country of Afghanistan. I would like to know, do you follow your donations in the country or not? The process that is being done by the donations. Because 1 billion euro for a country is exactly so much to improve in many, many perspectives. So if you follow, if yes, then why there has not been much considerable development in the country so far? Thank you.
First of all, well, what is our role going to be? In my speech I said I don't know exactly yet, because our current program runs until the end of 2017. And in the next 2 years we need to decide how exactly we are going to go into the next phase. Two very important conferences, international conferences, are coming up. One is the NATO summit in Warsaw, where the NATO countries in Afghanistan will decide on how, in a military sense, the future will look like in terms of NATO presence and support for the Afghan national defense forces. And then there is a summit which location has not been decided yet, but which will follow up on the London summit of last December, where more on the development cooperation side decisions will be taken as to how the international community will support the development programs of the current government. So we are now, as an embassy and my colleagues back in my capital, in a process of preparing for those two conferences and also preparing for the decisions that need to be taken to continue our support to Afghanistan in the years after 2017. So how exactly, what it will look like, I don't know yet. How big it will be, I don't know yet either. But that's where we are at the moment. Of course, we try to monitor our projects and programs. In a country like Afghanistan, that is very difficult, because I cannot go everywhere, and nor can my staff go everywhere. We have a lot of, we don't run our programs ourselves. People, when they hear the word embassy, they usually think of a very big building with lots of people. Let me pop that soft bell. I have maybe a dozen staff at the working level, that's a very generous sort of wrapping up of everybody that works at my embassy, and that's about it. So that's very small, and so we have to find other ways to monitor the way the programs and projects are running. Part of it we disperse through international joint donor trust funds, like the World Bank, the United Nations, and others will administer those funds for us. Part of it we run ourselves, but we have implementing partners such as NGOs, GIZs, again, some UN bodies that will implement our programs, and we will also do monitoring for us. Obviously, we try from the embassy to follow up on that ourselves. We go visit projects as much as we can, but sometimes it's simply possible. For instance, Uruzgan, I think mentioned Uruzgan. We have projects in Uruzgan that are sort of in the final stages. It is at the moment impossible for us to travel to Uruzgan to have a look at where that is and how it is going. So we're pointing at a very important and difficult part of our program. But the fact that we can't monitor it, we feel doesn't mean we should. We have to accept that there is some degree of risk in the terms of projects not doing exactly what we intended.
Excellency Chair of DUNYA University, and thanks for His Excellency Ambassador. I would like to ask you this question that you made in your comments that the international community made a big mistake back in 1990s when leaving Afghanistan behind. Do you think international community is once again making a bigger mistake by leaving Afghanistan in 2014? You mentioned a lot about how you support Afghanistan, but the main concern right now is about security and stability. Nothing would happen in unsecure area. You know that in 2001, when the international community came to Afghanistan for supporting the Taliban, a smaller enemy. Right now, ISIS, Daesh is even bigger, even with more financing, stuff like that. So I think the international community is once again making a bigger mistake by leaving Afghanistan in 2014. What are your mechanisms for re-establishing Afghanistan and securing the situation? Everything is because of security. If people live here, if people go, if there is no access to justice, if there is no access to health, if there is no access to education, if you mention about bureaucracy, everything is because of security. So what are your mechanisms and how you will secure and bring peace in Afghanistan during the transformation period? Thank you.
I think, but I can't prove it, but I think under the assumption that the Afghans would sort it out among themselves and peace would break out and things would be fine. And that was, of course, a big mistake because, as you all know, the then warlords started their own sort of civil war trying to topple first the then government and then among themselves. In 2014, a large number of the foreign troops have been withdrawn from Afghanistan. But that doesn't mean that we are leaving Afghanistan alone. Before that withdrawal, we have built up an Afghan national security force of 350,000 people, soldiers and policemen. That wasn't there at the time in the early 1990s. We are all here like ourselves, like I've explained, and many of my colleagues from other countries, other embassies, have similar kinds of assistance programs. We are all here to support Afghanistan in our development programs. That didn't exist in the early 1990s either. There is still a number of foreign troops present at the moment to train and advise and assist the Afghan security forces. So the comparison is really not there. It is a very different situation. And yes, I do think that in retrospect, timing wasn't brilliant in 2014 to have both an election, which means a political transition, and the withdrawal of most of the foreign troops, the military transition, in 1 year. I think we should have done that in different years. But I think that the commitment of the international community to Afghanistan today is very different from the one in the early 1990s. We wouldn't be talking here today about a decade of transformation if that commitment wasn't there. So I think we are definitely not leaving Afghanistan alone. And as I said in my speech, we need to find out ways how to make sure that Afghanistan can stay on its own feet, how Afghanistan can have finally peace, and the international community is there to assist Afghanistan.
یک کتابی است که چیزا هلند است، کشور هلند و همچنان بیرق دوستی که در اینجا افغانستان با کشور هلند است برای ما تحفه داده میشه.